It's very early morning. My dog might be snoring, but not at the point. My budgie might have a dicky fit because he hears my voice and sometimes goes off on one. That's just the budgie, but he is my budgie, so that's why probably. I've not had any sleep. I've been up all night. Anyway, we are now on to Fairyland. In Ireland, the rural parts of Ireland, of course, it was important not to build houses where it could cross a path used by fairies. Fairies only follow straight paths, even in bogland and waters, because fairy paths are straight. They go through obstacles. It was believed that if a house was to become built within the space or the area of that path, it could cause trouble from the Fae. It could become destroyed. They would punish builders by tossing things around the building inside, such as their tools especially, or they would toss the tools around to scare the builders, but then they would steal the tools. They quite like doing that. There's various ideas of how the Fae run their paths, of course, but when all said and done, it's a straight path. There's no real reason why, actually. It's just one of those things, I guess. They could cause quite a bit of havoc. So if we say a herding house fairy with a blast of winged or by carrying off the culprit away, never to be seen again. That's if you lived in the house that was in the way of the path. It's like a little saying. But you see, herding fairies generally, there's more than one. You could absolutely end up with an offending house fairy that was not impressed that this house was built here, even though it's a single fairy all alone. It will definitely act like some sort of poltergeist. It is believed to live in Westerly region. It's believed that this was discouraged due to the fact the fairies did not like it. The evidence of fairies were, well, nothing should be built there. So it's basically saying that in the evidence of where you could find fairies, do not build houses there. That's what it's saying. Like I say, when you translate it, it doesn't come out right, and sometimes I have to put it right. Fairyland is often reported and regarded as somewhere not entirely of our world, yet it exists just beyond our reach, perhaps on a floating island, beneath a mound, on a bleak, wet bog, or floating through the air constantly where our eyes cannot see. Portals and gates exist for fairies to go through so that they can obviously be in our world, their world, etc., and humans too. Most humans, however, never, because it's rare. Sometimes it's due to the fact they cannot get back, and if they could, it would be another time, another place, or even years and years will have passed and it will be impossible for the person to fit in. Not only that, It's also a possibility that the person would die. Fairyland is beautiful, unchanging and blossoming continually, which means all the plants grow continually, that there's no dryness and such and withering away. The sun always shines, the weather is always nice and fine. No death, no illness, no pain. Food tastes better, and wine does not get you drunk. Where have we heard about this world before? Oh yes, that's it, heaven. In Irish folklore, the Western Ocean fairy islands are said to drift around, not being tied down to one place, but able to appear at various places. They appear every 7 years off the coast of, is it Donegal? Something like that, Donegal. I think it's the coast of Donegal. You could bring it into this world by landing live embers on it. Shooting fire arrows would make it constantly appear, it is believed. Of course, nobody's actually done that. Tiananok, the land of the young, or if you look, I think Sam put the land of the perpetual young. I only know it as the land of the young, unfortunately, but it does sound better, the land of the perpetual youth or whatever. That sounds a lot better, doesn't it? Tiananog can be found across the sea from the west of Ireland. Now, it's believed that it's been seen as well, and you can research it. I'm sure there's a few videos on YouTube, and I don't know if they're fake, real, or what. I haven't got a clue. But there is some videos, regarding this. Those there avoided death, remained forever young. However, Fairyland is also believed to possibly be hidden underground, as in Middle Earth, under mounds of grass. Small hills, known as fairy mounds, may be a place to enter their realm, or may even be ancient burial sites, which is interesting. The Neolithic mounds and burrows are considered fairy homes, especially in Yorkshire and the Isle of Man. They're common in Scotland to be in hills. Mounds would have fairy homes just underneath them called fairy knolls or fairy knoll. Either Fairyland is not visible to the casual eye, or it vibrates differently, or it's somewhere where we just can't reach. These mounds were said to hold diminutive cities where fairies danced away, walking by them at night, or at the turning points of the year, which is obviously, as you know, Beltane, Samhain, things like that, is risky. It's a risky time due to an invisible door becoming open, and you can't actually see it, so you could just end up going through it, but also you could be lured inside to an endless dance. Trapped people do not tend to, well, let's be honest, they never intended to go anywhere back then because it was evil. So, people now, obviously, they don't tend to wait for a door or anything like that. They would rather just pretend that none of that exists, But if a door should reveal itself, you can knock 3 times and wait for permission to enter. They may open the door to you. if you knock 3 times on the door. So if you come across a sudden fairy door, knock 3 times, see what happens. Throughout the years, they've been told stories where many fairy doors have appeared, such as beneath riverbanks, standing stones, obviously, Roman ruins. The Roman ruins are very important actually because most of the old Roman lanes are known as the fairy paths. They can be on moors, they can be in rivers, many thorn type plants, thorn bushes. Definitely is an area where you can enter to seek fairy realm. However, that does not mean you'll be allowed in. Under lakes, in wells, waterfalls, deep caverns, down long tunnels, obviously in caves, old mines, many places. The route inside is often long and dark, and the journey to Fairyland may take several days and involve wading through deep water. Despite Fairyland being underground, there is light, although not a sun sometimes. Fairyland is lit by torches. The light of these torches are like the balls of light from orbs. They can dim, but they can brighten, often described as being more of a twilight feeling. It is largely undistinguishable from the land. On sort of what that means is, on the surface, it will look just like Earth. It's underneath that the difference occurs. There are pastures, fields, and obviously this includes wherever herds of animals are, sheep especially, birds, you'll see fruit, flowers. It tends to be an area where around it there's abundance. But it can be on flat, open, plain as well, land or hills, usually threaded by a river running between lakes. Many fairies lived in great cities where they danced and feasted constantly. Can you imagine that every day? I don't think I could do that. There are many palaces and castles, perhaps made from precious metals, from gems and crystals, but there are obviously the ordinary buildings too, not just the grand ones, like little wooden shacks. The old lady in the shoe. The old lady in the shoe was a vain shoe, but not the kind that we think. And the idea was actually all the children that she had, they were all changelings. Sorry guys, I had to have a drink of water. Yeah, so the old... I could tell you the story that my grandma used to tell me, and it was nothing like what's told, and I know for a fact I've never seen it published or seen it out there, but she used to tell me the story of the old lady, and she said that once upon a time, an elderly fairy lady was tired of being in a community. So she took what she thought was hers and she found a place to call her home. This was a shoe. She preferred to be alone now she was much older, but there are rules and regulations when it comes to the fae. She did not seek permission. She did not tell anyone she was going to do this, and she took items without stating so. So while this old lady did have some time alone in the shoe, very happily, it came a time the other fairies decided it was time for her to pay some penance. So the pixies went out into the world, and they brought her children. They switched children of human and changelings and fetched her back, all these children, and dumped them on her doorstep with a note that basically said that it was time now to pay her debts for leaving with not a word and for taking with not an ask. So it came to pass that the old lady lived in a shoe with many children, all little brats, mind I add. And eventually she went crazy because of this. But she lived a long life still. The children grew up and they moved on, but she went doolally. So yeah, it's a different story to probably what other people are told, but that's the story that I was told. The Three Blind Mice is yet another, because in my stories growing up, the three blind mice, they were fairy mice, and they were naughty because they would go around stealing all the cheese from the farmer's storage area. And one day he did get fed up and he managed to snip off one of the mice's tails. But for this he paid. He suffered a great deal. His cheese was never the same. After he attacked the mice, they went running back to their group of fae and told them. So it came to pass that the farmer ended up with somewhat of poltergeist activity stirring within his barn, his house. Cattle would disappear, sheep would just vanish, and his cheese was never the same because they took all the goodness from it, and that learned him never to attack an animal again. But like I say, it's probably sat there thinking, I've never heard that story. No, you probably won't have, because my grandma probably made it up or got it from somebody or other else. But yeah, so my stories that I know, they're different to your stories. I can't help that. I really can't. I wish I could. And as we know, it's one of the things that there are many stories about being lured to Fairyland. Usually it's young men that are lured to Fairyland, but they are gifted powers of music, especially the handsome. Beautiful young maidens may be kidnapped to be brides to fairy kings or princes. Fairy men sometimes try to seduce women and will extort human men into surrendering their wives or daughters. Brides on their wedding day might be snatched away before the marriage can be consummated, and it was only consummated after having sex. If they did not have sex back in the day, then the wedding did not exist, it could be annulled. Nursing mothers may be kidnapped to suckle fairy babies, and midwives were also valued and kidnapped. A strong man would sometimes also be taken to give powers to the fairies in their battles, as fairies in battles are unable to prevail against each other unless a mortal man takes a hand. That's just a myth, obviously. The most commonly kidnapped people were musicians, of course. Captives might be picked up in a fairy blast called Elfin Eddy. It's a fairy wind that comes and whisks them away. And this occurs when trooping fairies travel and the speed of their passage creates a blast of wind. And if you throw a left shoe, a hat, a knife, or earth from a molehill, this could work as a substitute so they don't carry you off, which I find very odd. I don't, in my opinion, that is something you cannot get out of. I mean, come on, it's like a tornado, yeah? You can't get out of that, surely. Oh dear. But you meant to throw it at the wind, and the fairies would think they'd got you and carry on, it's said. They did give the musicians jobs, but it's important to remember that they also could work the musicians that they snatched to death. You know, there are words that you can speak to stop being taken by these fairy blasts. I think it's, what's it go like now? This is mine, or specken at the same time. That's yours, this is mine, our specken at the same time. And I don't know what that means, but unfortunately I obviously can't ask my nan because she's not here. The fairy blast was very strong and could carry humans long distances. These travelling at night are most subject to such kidnappings, obviously, as they wonder they will probably disturb fairy paths or fairies on their way, or something going on with the fae and disturb it, they will take you. Usually, once someone enters Fairyland, they are trapped forever. They are unable to find the entrance again. A captive can be rescued as long as they don't consume any food or drink. Otherwise, another attempt cannot be made until 7 years later. Some manage to leave, but it's very enduring and exhausting. So sometimes once they've returned, they wither away and die. They find that many years have passed. They realise that they are very old now and everything's different. It's really, really not worth doing it, you know. Even if their visit has been 5 minutes, it seems, it could totally have been 500 years. No one really knows. No one really knows. It's believed that clothing of a visitor from Fairyland may put a pin within their clothes, and what happens is with the pin in their clothes, when they come back, that pin needs to be removed, especially if they're in slumber when they return, because there's a lot of that's not really mentioned, but when in Fairyland, let's say you were meditating, for example, so they didn't call it that back then. So what they would do, they would put a pin in a particular place in the clothing. Say they entered Fairyland. When they came back, before that person was woken up, the pin needed to be removed so that everything turned the way it was, nothing had changed. Like I said, they're all just myths anyway, really, but it's an odd thing, isn't it? Put a pin in your clothes and you'll be all right. They look at you gonna hurt, wouldn't they? Right, now I'm on to the fairy rings, and look, I get it's magical, this, that, and the other. There is a natural process, guys, for fairy rings, okay? It's fungi that grows. That's it. There's no fairies dancing in a circle, I can assure you. My nan used to say, and I do believe we've seen a few, but I can't be certain. Nothing's fact. My memories are not. They're coming back, but they're coming back in bits, and it's very odd. But Apparently that was due to so much trauma as a child. When you endure trauma, you seem to have problems with memory over time and stuff, but they're more the let's take a will-o'-the-wisp, and it's a ball of light. A fairy ring would be balls of lights in a ring that were moving oddly within that ring. The idea of the fairy ring circle is just fungi that grows in that way. Does it grow in that way because of the fae? Who knows? Who knows? But it is a natural thing. A fairy ring is very natural. It's not magic, you know. It is natural, but it's rare, that's all. And there's a reason. Either it's rarer now than what it was, and we'll get into that. But obviously, the term fairy ring is just a circle of fungi in grass and fields, and it dates from the 1950s. However, the connection is much older and has existed at least from the 14th century. The first recorded incidents of, I think, the Middle England word for fairy ring, I think it was, what was it now? Elf ring plants, elf ring wart, then referring to a ring of daisies caused by elves dancing, dates from around 1300. In France, they would call them, was it rondisseurs? Yeah, rondisseurs, sorcerer rings. In Germany, Hexenring, the Witcher rings. And according to folklore, fairy rings are the location of gateways into fairylands. Not so, guys. I'm sorry, not so. A fairy ring appears when apparently a fairy or pixie or an elf appears. The circular pattern of the mushrooms shows where fairies danced, a ring holding hands. And usually, fairy rings were seen as very dangerous and you should never go near one. Well, it depends what kind of mushrooms they are, doesn't it? If it's poisonous, then no, don't. Most commonly, they're believed to be worn areas of grass made by fairies dancing. The fairies would usually come out at night just after dark, although they've been seen in daylight. As they dance, their feet leave an imprint in the grass. They often use the mushrooms to sit on and rest. A sudden appearance of rings in the morning was evident of fairies, especially the evening before. That's when they would have been there and then left the ring. In Wales, the rings signify an underground fairy village. Welsh folklore also considers the rings as locations of fertility and fortune. The French tradition was that they were guarded by giant toads that cursed those who violated the circles. Those who join the fairy dance within the circle under the light of the moon can become lost in time forever and will disappear forever. Some were whisked away to Fairyland while others experienced time stopping. Some sources say that they danced for a year and a day, yet only minutes went by in this world. There's an Irish folklore tale of a girl, I believe it is, yeah. So there was a girl on her way home after buying bread. She heard music, and after looking to see where it was coming from, she encountered a group of fairies. They called her to dance with them, and she stepped inside the fairy ring. She danced for a while, then told them she had to go home because her mother was waiting. They were okay with this, and they let her on her way. She was a young girl after all. When she got home, she was very shocked to see her mother looked much older. When her mother asked where she had been, she simply replied, "To the market for bread, mother." The mother told her that she'd been gone for 20 years, and this shocked her hair white, so it said. In all cases, people were warned against entering a fairy ring. You could die young, become invisible to the mortal world, unable to sleep. The ring could also transport you to the fairy realm, or it could literally make you disappear. You could be forced to dance around the fairy ring until you die of exhaustion or madness. And there's many tales actually of Ireland, and it's kind of like a banshee lady in a green dress that waits for unsuspecting men with her dancing and singing. She will lure them into the ring to dance, and one states that she will such had vampire tendencies and would drink the blood or bite them, and others say she would seduce them like incubus succubus type deal, and then the other one says that she would have them dance until they died of exhaustion, things like that. In England, the 17th century, it was commonly believed that fairies dancing in a ring at night didn't speak in words, but made a distinct humming noise. The folklorist W.J. Vaughan told the 1633 story of Mr. Hart, which is H-A-R-T. In 1865, the original spelling has been modernised for ease of reading, of course. Coming over the lawns, it being near dark, and approaching one of the fairy dancers, as the common people call these in these parts. The green circles made by those sprites on the grass. He all at once saw an innumerable quantity of pixies, sprites, on a very small mound, dancing round and round and singing and making all manner of small odd noises. The beings, very greatly amused, and yet he was not able to get their attention. Apparently, he actually ran away from them. So he was scared and he liked it. Oh, typical, isn't it? Being as he supposes, kept there in some sort of enchantment, they no sooner perceive him, but they surrounded him on all sides, and what it says betwist him, but I'm not sure what that means. The fear and amusement, he fell down, scarcely knowing what had just happened. These little creatures pushed him all over, and as they did, they were making quick humming noises. So he did try and run away, I guess, but he didn't get away. And I'm not sure what that means, what betwist. I think what befell him, what became of him, I guess. Obviously, because they surrounded him and pretty much made him, this did terrify him, of course. It's not something that someone likes to see. He said that apparently the length of time just left him, and when the sun rose, he found himself exactly in the middle or one of those fairy dancers. So I guess he kind of passed out from that and then woke up and he was in the middle. In Germany, fairy rings were thought to mark the sight of witches dancing. Oh gosh. Obviously, dancing at night, worshipping this, that, and the other. But I do believe it was a particular night, if I'm right. What's it called now? Saint Walpurgis Eve. Yeah, Walpurgis, something like that. And that was before the May Day, which obviously we have the 1st of May. Traditionally, was when they believed witches worshipped the devil. In the Dutch tradition, the circles show where the devil set his milk churn. Interesting. In Tyrol, fairy rings were attributed to the fairy trails and the dragons. Once a dragon had created a circle, nothing but toadstools could grow there. Even that'd be for years and years, nothing but toadstools. In Norse mythology, urinating in a fairy ring was thought to cause, disease basically, but to be more precise, it to be most likely something to do with the veins or the urinary tract, you know. In some parts of Europe, entering a fairy ring meant losing an eye. Collecting dew from grass or flowers from inside a fairy ring can also bring bad luck. A fairy ring is possibly the most dangerous on May Eve or on All Hallows Eve, which obviously it's the Eve of Samhain, but now it's that, whatever. Why they changed it, I do not know. I guess it's just one of those things that through time things change. Protection, or to protect yourself from a fairy ring, is said to be some very, very strange ideas. But anyway, on a full moon, you can apparently run around the ring once, but if it's not a full moon, you need to run around the ring 9 times. But if it's a full moon, just one. It needs to be in the direction the sun travels during the day. If you do, you may hear the fairies dancing underground. You may also hear songs or humming sounds of the fae. Apparently, wearing a hat backwards or your clothes inside out will confuse the fairies. If you do enter a fairy ring, you should never accept an offer of food or drink. Even taking a single sip is enough to kill you, remember? If you take a single step into a fairy ring, this can also say you're going to die young. A 19th century Welsh tale describes the dangers. A tale from, is it Carmarthen Mountains of Wales? Current in the 19th century, it describes a mortal's encounter with a fairy ring. And with being 19th century, it's still quite fairly new, I would say. He saw the two of Teg in appearance like tiny soldiers dancing in a ring. He set out for the scene of revelry and soon drawn near to the ring, where the gay company of males and females were. I'm sorry, my dog's snoring. were factoring it to the music of the harp. Never, never he's seen such handsome people, nor had he not so enchantingly cheerful. They beckoned him, laughing faces, join us, as they leaned backwards, almost falling, whirling round and round, with joined hands. Those who were dancing never, I think that says, I can't read my grandma's writing to be honest, never swinged from the girdle, but some were climbing over the old cromlech, and others chasing each other with surprising swiftness and the greatest glee. Still others rode about on their horses, the most beautiful form they were. All was in silence as the shepherd came upon this ring of fairy frolic. So they weren't just dancing in the ring, there was much going off within the ring. And he decided, obviously, that he would get close to the ring. He ended up being dragged into it, so to speak, by his own accord, of course, because he was the one that decided to actually go in there. And once he was in the circle, obviously, and he'd only put one foot within this magic ring, but that was it. The instant he did it, his ears were charmed with strains of the most beautiful music he had ever heard. So it's said that he was in there a while, but it doesn't say how much time passed or anything like that, which is a shame. I thought it would, but it doesn't. It just says that when he came to, it wasn't long after that that he was frail and passed away. Once someone's in a fairy ring, although you might be able to pull them out, you may be able to help them escape with a human sort of chain from the outside formed to pull that person out. Ideally, if you create a chain, you can pull them out with string and then a chain of people and make sure that person grabs the string, obviously. Ideally, using a branch of rowan, mountain ash, apparently the wood which the cross of Christ was built, you can hand them this and pull them out with a simple rowan stick. Once in the fairy ring, a rescue is pretty hard and you must have to have rope around you before you go in and be held by trusted friends who you know are going to pull you out and not get lured in themselves, obviously. It's believed that wild marjoram, but it had to be, if it was wild marjoram, you'd have to pick it from the east, and also the time. You could put that, toss it within the circle, and apparently it would confuse the fairies. Alternatively, you could touch the victim with iron. There's many stories where they were rescued with iron, but when they were rescued and they came out of the circle, the person actually turned to dust. Can you imagine seeing your friend rescuing them from such a thing and then they just turn to dust in front of you? I think I'd be stood there for about a week contemplating, what had happened. I will have to say this, so the fairy rings one was the hardest one for me to translate because some of it just doesn't make any sense, so I couldn't translate it all and I just did my best. Now I'm going to be logical and tell you what it's all about. Fairy rings, they're not that. That's for definite. An actual real fairy ring will have something to do with either there'll be lights that are an unusual ring of formation and travel at a slow speed, where you can hear somber music, humming, things like that. Another form of the fairy ring is what we know as crop circles. That is also a fairy ring created by the Fae and elementals together for messages that we should be reading and cannot. It is believed. I definitely believe that that's what they are, and I definitely believe they are fairy rings, but not the mushrooms. It's a naturally occurring circular ring of mushrooms. They're mainly found in forested areas, but also appear in grasslands or on lawns even. Although they are not rare, they just need the right conditions to be able to form the right soil type, the right weather, and the rest of it when it comes along in a minute, I'll tell you. There is a reason now that they are less rare. They're a result of a pattern of mycelium growth. Mycelium is the underground organism that produces mushrooms. This is a relationship, and it's explained by comparison to sort of an apple tree. So if you think of like the mushroom as the apple and the mycelium is the tree, that's their formation, you know. That would be where they would root from. It starts as a singular point and grows into a circular shape, sending out a subterranean network of fine tubular threads called the hyphae. Yep. And it's completely and utterly natural occurring. Let me just get my notes here. There's some funny words. So it will continue to push outwards as it seeks more nutrients. The mushrooms that grow up form the circular sort of underground mat, form a circular patterns above the ground. So there's different ones. There's the mushrooms that grow in a circular motion under the ground, but then there's the other which will form a circular pattern above the ground. There's different ones. Gradually, the mycelium at the centre of the circle dies out. However, its outer edge keeps growing in diameter. So again, the ring gradually increases. Sometimes environmental factors and animal droppings may replenish the nutrients in the centre of the ring, which can result in a second ring growing inside the first. Or there may be more than one ring, and they can also overlap. Mycelium is always there. We notice them when the mushrooms form, but it's always growing. It can show as dark green grass or a ring of dry, dead grass. Dark circles will obviously occur wherever the mycelium is sort of trying to grow mushrooms, I would say, you know. That's the idea anyway. It would try and push up to keep the growth going. So they will appear and they can be free or they can be tethered. Free rings, usually found in meadows, fields, lawns, are called free because they're not connected with any other organisms. The mushrooms that pop up in the rings, so them that you see come up and shoot up, they will be, this is saprotrophs, meaning they feed on dead or dying organic material. Tethered rings occur in forests with one or more trees in the centre. These rings are tethered to the tree because the fungi is mycorrhizal. and that it has a symbiotic relationship with the roots of the trees and cannot survive without them. Almost any type of ground fruiting mushroom could grow in a ring, but some are just more common than others. The most well known as fairy ring mushroom is the Scotch bonnets. This is the Marasmius aureus. I'm sorry, my dog's really snoring for some reason. Or the Marasmius aureus. There's many ways of pronouncing the second part. This is edible and forms large rings, but irregular. So they may attain a diameter of 365 meters. So edible and poisonous mushrooms make up fairy rings, so you should never, never just go up and start to think you can identify them and eat them. For God's sake, don't do that, okay? Not a good idea. Fairy rings are commonly formed by usually what we know as field mushroom, Agaricus campestris. And that's why I had to write it down in my notes, otherwise I would never freaking remember that, I'm telling you. These mushrooms are about 2 meters in diameter. The largest ring ever found was in, I think was it France? Yeah, it was in France, Belfort in France, 600 meters in diameter, I believe, and 700 years old, mind I add. Getting rid of a fairy ring from your lawn can be very difficult. The mycelium needs to be completely eradicated to stop it from growing and producing more mushrooms. Not that it always produces mushrooms, remember, so even when the mushrooms are not there, the mycelium is still growing, hence why you still get the ring that obviously goes around it. Now, the idea of these fairy rings, by the way, they are replenished usually by the rabbits. And what has happened is back then, apparently, there was actually more rabbits than what there is now, believe it or not. So when the mycelium was underground but not growing the mushrooms, it took rabbit droppings or hair droppings to be placed there. And what would happen is the rabbits would come and eat the grass around it, making it flat. And then their droppings would replenish the mycelium. The mycelium would use those droppings to then form mushrooms. Hence the circle would continue because the rabbits would keep the grass down and the circles would grow, the mushrooms would grow above. You've got your circles. Even though mycelium does grow, it will die out. Obviously, over time, it will just sort of wither away because there's nothing for it to grow on. Apparently, the rabbit population is actually far less now than what it was back then. So the rabbits are not fertilising the fairy rings to grow. That's why they are rarer now than what they were back then. But it's a completely natural process. And I know that people like the myths and legends throughout, but honestly, in my opinion and my experiences, they are not fairy rings. And a fairy ring can be many different types of things. They do exist, but they can be many different types of things depending on the fee and the area. They can be seen as various things. And I know people love that whole, the fairy ring, and I'm not taking that away. Maybe they are, and I've just never experienced it, so please don't think I'm taking that, because I'm not. I'm just giving you the natural way in which those mushrooms grow and form the fairy circles. It's completely natural and it can occur randomly, and that's just how they are formed. So I'm not bursting anybody's bubble, or I'm not taking away fairy rings. I'm just saying, in my opinion, that I have never experienced such a I've not no. I've never really experienced anything like that. Others, yes, but not in that form what is being stated. Have you heard my budgie? Listen. I go quiet and he goes quiet. I start to talk and he goes off on one. It's funny. It's called Pip, by the way. It's just a normal yellow budgie. I think, how old is he? Oh gosh, he's in his teens. He's very old, but very lively. You wouldn't think he were that old anyway. But yeah, I apologise. That was probably the hardest one over with, thankfully. And the reason being is because the writings were all, the pages had fallen out. And due to the pages being withered and tarnished, and it was quite hard to translate it, so I just did my best and I was ready to get that over with, that's for sure. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. Love and light and many girls with good